we've established that I like fairy tales and that I don't like Disney versions. My opinion is the most important view. However, Professor Halsey has, persuaded me to say two more words about fairy tales. The Norton Anthology of Children's Literature states the fairy tale focuses on miraculous transformations that overcome the disadvantages of the protagonists and enable them to succeed in life. Fairy tales are also controversial. By the end of the 19th century, fairy tales had moved from being a predominantly oral form to being a written form, which meant that they were put into the hands of the literate middle class. According to Jack Zipes, fairy tales introduced notions of elitism and separatism. They also represented rigid ideas about class and gender. Aren't there an awful lot of tales where a young woman waits for a male to save her from danger? This has become such an issue that the phrase princess culture now denotes a particular mindset among young girls that they are princesses and deserve to be treated accordingly. Some readers have also pointed out that fairy tales give a negative view of step families. Consider the stepmother in Hansel and Gretel. Then there are the infamous stepsisters in Cinderella. Of course, many fairy tales are filled with cannibalism, murder, violence, and other unsavory events. Indeed, in some tales, the so-called happy ending is death for someone. Other scholars defend fairy tales. Bruno Bettelheim points out that it isn't Prince Charming who saves Hansel. Rather, his sister Gretel saves him by pushing the witch into the oven. Moreover, fairy tales initiate children into family conflicts and how to think creatively to find a solution. Bettelheim argues, by dealing with universal human problems, particularly those which preoccupy a child's mind, these stories speak to his budding ego and encourage its development. And while Zipes doesn't shy away from criticizing fairy tales, he also says, fairy tales are uncanny because they tell us what we need, and they unsettle us by showing what we lack and how we might compensate for lack. In the 20th century, these conflicts play out in different versions of tales. When Angela Carter rewrites fairy tales in her book, The Bloody Chamber, she doesn't merely retell a story. She changes the stories and their meanings. Often, her changes involve doing away with the idea of a helpless female being rescued by a male. In The Stinky Cheese Man, Little Red Running Shorts gets to Grandma's house before the wolf does. Similarly, Anne Sexton's revisions of the tales often question the idea of the happy ending. In Sexton's versions, there is no happily ever after. As you read the fairy tales, consider who wins and who loses. Think about who is good and bad. Examine the solutions to the problems of starvation, poverty, and just plain bad luck. Ask what the main message of each tale is. Get your paws on a few different versions of a tale and compare them. Then decide for yourself about these fairy tales and what they mean.